Now, while the shutdown has been lifted, there's still some questions lingering, though, of how will this impact travel, especially ahead of the holiday season. We're just a couple weeks away from Thanksgiving, and so I know people are curious, will my travel be impacted? We've got a travel expert here with us. This is Katie Nastro with Going. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Julie.
So that's the big question everyone has is, do we know what's going to happen to our travel during Thanksgiving, and what does that look like? What are you seeing on your end?
Yeah, I come with cautious optimism. Just today alone is one of the first days that we've seen no air traffic control staffing triggers. So that's a really good sign that we're starting to see normalcy. As well as yesterday, we only saw roughly 4% of flights being outrightly canceled. Now, the FAA mandates are still in place. So if you do have travel throughout the weekend into early next week, it is likely that you still could potentially be canceled or see some delays. But as we go, it is likely that the FAA starts to lift these mandates and we start to see those mandated cancellations decrease and we get back to normal operations. I think a lot of people understand that airlines can't just flip a switch and operate exactly as normal, but it will take a couple days to smooth out the system. But we're already seeing healthy signs as is. So for anybody that's curious about looking forward to Thanksgiving, again, we're cautiously optimistic that this will all work itself out before that hectic holiday.
I know that's really relieving news for a lot of people, especially here in Charlotte. We've got Charlotte Douglas International, which is a huge airport. Are there any flights in particular, any flight paths, any airports that you're seeing more heavily impacted by this at this point?
Yeah, look, Newark is one airport that we have seen multiple staffing triggers at, and this has been a chronic issue for the New York area for quite some time. And really, in general, I think I want people to be aware that even with the shutdown over, there is still a risk at any given point in time moving forward in the future that air traffic controllers, there is understaffing at select airports. Now, you can try to target avoiding specific airports, but that doesn't mean that you're always going to be without risk. There's always risk for that, as well as weather, mechanical issues, anytime you travel. So we just want people to be aware that this is also something that could impact your travel, but to not automatically expect this every time you go to take a flight.
I know that this is some cautious optimism, which I think people are looking forward to, but I'm also just curious, given this was the longest shutdown in U.S. history, and we've got a travel expert here, from your perspective, how was this period that we're now coming out of compared to other shutdown periods that you've seen before?
Well, this was unlike any other, and clearly because it was the longest in history. But just for some perspective, in the last few days, really, we saw the fourth worst day when it came to cancellations in the last 2 years occur this past Sunday. And so that just gives some perspective. Thousands upon thousands of flights, over 9,000 flights across last weekend were impacted. That's something that we just don't typically see on any given day, even with winter storms. I can remember the great snowpocalypse of 2022, and it sort of reminded me of that, but this was far-reaching, far more impactful than that. And looking at the most recent longest shutdown prior to this one, 2018, 2019, we saw 35 days roughly of a shutdown impacted and travel severely impacted. But this really takes the cake in terms of what we saw and how much it affected travelers during this elongated time.
Those are definitely some stark numbers to put things into perspective, for sure. I'm curious, though, a lot of people were holding off on booking flights to see what happened with the shutdown. Do you have any advice for people who may have done that or just start looking to travel in general?
Yeah, I think, we did see some softness in terms of year-over-year booking last week because people were hesitant because we didn't know if this shutdown was coming to a close. But we want people to book in confidence now, and we want people to book ASAP so they could take advantage of the flights that not only are left, but the better prices that are left. Because, air travel doesn't exactly work the same way that retail does, where bargain bins come out and flights just magically get priced 50% off. It's actually the opposite direction. And now that we're within a 2-week period of Thanksgiving, a peak period, it's really like the Super Bowl of travel, we're expecting to see those prices start to really increase. They're already higher than last year by about 8% for domestic travel. So our biggest piece of advice over at Going is book your flights now if you know that you want to travel.
All right, this is the time for everyone looking to travel. Make sure you get that done quick. Katie, anything else that we haven't talked about you think people need to know?
Yeah, we want people to, while there's no best sort of practice or magic bullet that you can take to be able to rid yourself of the possibility of a travel disruption, but we want people to be aware that it could happen at any point. Cautious optimism, but it can happen, and always, always, always have a what I like to call a plan B flight in mind on the carrier that you're flying with. So if your flight, say at 11 a.m. is impacted and you're significantly delayed, maybe there's a later flight in the day that you already know about that you can switch yourself to within an airline's app or contacting the customer service agent. You always just want to have some sort of escape route for those just in case moments.
Good advice. Always have a backup plan, a plan B, but cautious optimism is good for a lot of people here to hear. All right, Katie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Safe travels.
Thank you. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in 2 minutes with some more news on the shutdown and, of course, on Border Patrol coming to Charlotte.